I do find it quite ironic that Mark Carney is portraying himself as an outsider, yet he's got most of the votes of the inside cabinet. And then Chrystia Freeland is running on the anti-establishment platform, yet she was the establishment for the past 12 years. So if these are the things that they're testing out within their own ranks for the Canadian public, I think that they should reconsider what their narratives are going to be, because they're really not going to fly.
Well. This leadership race keeps getting a little bit more interesting every day. We've had quite a few developments since the weekend. First off being Chaudhry Arya, the gentleman who believes French is not that important to Quebecers, has been seemingly disqualified from the race. We also have about 5 or 6 new cabinet ministers endorsing Mark Carney, as well as Chrystia Freeland coming out and saying that she's not part of the Ottawa elites, and that the Prime Minister's office, the PMO, is actually pinning Mark Carney and doing everything that they can in their power to have him win. So without further ado, let's get into the stories. Now we're going to start off with the announcement from Chaudhry Arya. As I mentioned, he put out a post saying, "I was informed by the Liberal Party of Canada that I will not be permitted to enter the leadership race. While I await their official communication, I am carefully considering my next steps. This decision raises significant questions about the legitimacy of the leadership race, and by extension, the legitimacy of the next Prime Minister of Canada." Now, as I mentioned, there hasn't been any concrete evidence or explanation as to why he's been seemingly disqualified, but a few theories have been floating around. Potentially it was because of his comments about French not being important to Quebecers, didn't really bode well for the Liberal government and the Liberal Party, but more so it could be his ties to India and the Modi government. David Cochrane brought this up when they did the initial interview when he was launching his campaign, and he does have quite a close relationship with the Indian government, with Modi, and seeing as that relationship's kind of rocky with Canada and India, not boding too well in terms of foreign interference. And now that there's one less candidate, looks like Mark Carney's support is growing even stronger because, as I mentioned, over the weekend, he gained about 4 or 5 new supporters. Take a look.
Speaking in Toronto today, Carney added to his quickly growing support from the Liberal cabinet.
Mark Carney is the leader that Canada needs.
Transport Minister Anita Anand, Housing Minister Nate Erskine-Smith, and Defense Minister Bill Blair all say he's the right man to lead their party and the country.
Now, besides those 3 cabinet ministers, we had 2 more come out, that being Francois Philippe Champagne, as well as Mark Miller, the immigration minister, showing their support for Carney. And with this influx in announcements and support for him, we now see Chrystia Freeland using this as some sort of advantage by going onto media outlets and radio outlets, claiming that the PMO, the Prime Minister's office, is handpicking Carney as the winner because they don't see her as one of the Ottawa elites. She doesn't fall into that category. And when the hosts of these outlets hear this, they push back.
It is certainly looking like Mark is the choice of the Liberal establishment. It is certainly looking like he is the PMO's candidate. And
the PMO's candidate. Can you explain that?
And that is okay with me.
Can you explain that?
I am really happy to be running against the Ottawa establishment. I think we need a change. I made that very clear with my resignation letter, and my campaign is about reviving grassroots democracy in the Liberal Party. It's about saying we as a party need to do things differently, and it's about saying if I am elected as leader, if I am elected as Prime Minister, I will do things very differently.
We are completely out of time, but you made an allegation there, PMO's candidate. Can you cite one piece of evidence that that is the case?
I said it certainly is seeming that way.
So it seems that way, but you don't have any evidence that you would share with us here.
I don't believe in trafficking in secondhand reports, but it seems that way. And look, I am really okay with that because I think we do need a change. We need a change in how our government works. We need a change in how the party works. We need a change in how the country works. And I am really, really excited about standing up for that grassroots change.
Now, it's absolutely amazing how delusional one person could be that they think that that was the right thing to say. Yet she went on another CBC program, The Current with Matt Galloway, and essentially doubled down because when he asked her the same question referencing what her original answer was, this was her response to that.
I want to talk about your plan in a moment with Trump, but can I go back to you and the change that you're saying you represent? You told my colleague Catherine Cullen on the House this weekend that you were running against the Ottawa establishment. Help me understand this, because until very recently, you were the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. How are you not the Ottawa establishment?
Well, look, Matt, I think that it is pretty clear that the Ottawa elites today, that I am not their preferred candidate. And I get that. I understand why for the Prime Minister and the people the closest to him that they would feel that way. The fact is, though, that today what we need is to be listening to the grassroots, that we need to be listening to Liberal Party members. One of the things we've allowed to have happen is for the Liberal Party itself to atrophy and for the grassroots not to have control of the party. Something that I will do if I am chosen as leader is give that control back to the grassroots and say, you have to have the grassroots decide how they want to exercise that control. But the first thing I would do is say to the grassroots members, you guys figure out how you want to speak truth to power. You guys figure out what kind of a leadership review mechanism you want to have. I think if we had had that in place, we would be in a much better position today than we are now.
Just to be clear, you don't see yourself as part of the Ottawa elite. You were the Deputy Prime Minister. You were the Finance Minister. You held some of the highest positions in government.
Now, what I love is that you can just hear the bewilderment in Matt Galloway's voice there when he's pointing out that you were Deputy Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, and Trudeau's right-hand woman for the past 9 years, and you're claiming that you're not part of the Ottawa elite. How can you square that circle? How does that make sense? And she never actually answers the question. She just continuously repeated grassroots like 7 or 8 times. It was such a ridiculous answer and statement to make. I don't think she understands that she won't be fooling anybody with saying that. And this actually might be why so many cabinet ministers and MPs are backing Carney, because Freeland keeps saying this ridiculous stuff. Mark Miller actually was on CBC with David Cochrane, and they did talk a little bit about this and why he was supporting him. They brought up the fact that Freeland is saying this, that Carney is the PMO's pick. So just take a listen to this.
Okay, let's take a look at where the caucus endorsements stand. Mark Carney remains far ahead with his fellow MPs, not with his fellow MPs, with Liberal MPs, with 56 supporters. Chrystia Freeland has 26, and Karina Gould has 2. I'm joined now by the latest cabinet minister to endorse Mark Carney, and that is Mark Miller. He is the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. I was breaking news there, calling Mark Carney a member of Parliament, which is not true, but maybe he will be someday.
It'll come.
Why are you endorsing Mark Carney? Why are you getting on board this particular campaign?
Look, I think he's the right man for the job. We could go through his resume. We don't have to. His CV is probably unequaled in terms of its quality in Canada. What he's done on the world stage is well known. What he's able to do for Canada is well known. But for me, I was joking, he's a goalie like me, but it's about the intangibles. He gives us a shot at beating Pierre Poilievre. I think that's important, given the toxic rhetoric coming out of Pierre's mouth on a daily basis. But it's about issues that I cared about, David. Obviously, the economy. I don't think we have to be dogmatic to what we've done for the last 9 years. We have to be able to look at some fresh air coming in and some new ideas, but also matters that matter to Canada and to me, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, right. The environment. Those are things that I think are very important for our party, are very important for Canadians and the next generation. So we had some good talks and chats together. I wanted to understand that he's a regular guy. You can have a chat with him. Someone of that quality, you sometimes have difficulty talking to him or having a real conversation. You can have a real conversation with the guy. So that gave me confidence, and it did take, obviously with the Prime Minister leaving, it took some time and some reflection to think about where I would put my support, and it's with Mark Carney.
Now, right off the bat, I want to apologize. I know it's tough listening to Mark Miller. The guy takes forever to get anything out. It's like he's processing every single word that he's saying. But one thing that he did mention was how easy and laid back Mark Carney is, how he's so easy to talk to. Well, that doesn't seem like the case when the media is questioning him on very simple things. Like today, when Rebel News caught up with him when he was in Quebec, they simply asked him about the WEF, and the guy flat out lied, saying he's not even part of it.
Mr. Carney, sorry. Mr. Carney, why are you lying to Canadians saying that you're an outsider when you're the ultimate insider? Why are you lying to Canadians? You are the special advisor to Trudeau. Because we are an English news outlet, and you know it. But why are you lying to Canadians saying that you're an outsider? When you return as a Prime Minister, are you going to cut ties with the World Economic Forum?
J'en ai pas.
You have been invited multiple times.
Now, this certainly isn't news to anybody who knows Mark Carney. They all know that he's part of the WEF. Yet for him to go out there and say he's not is very telling of the type of person he is. And another thing to add to the hypocrisy of that is he was just currently in Montreal. He flew back to Toronto, and now he's just gone back to Quebec to do this thing with Champagne. So his carbon footprint is out of control, yet this is the guy who talks about carbon pricing. He talks about net zero. He's all about that, yet not for him, just for other people. But he's not part of the WEF, even though he was at the WEF. This guy is just all over the place, and he's just a liar, flat out liar. So I don't know how anybody can actually not see through him, but listen to Mark Miller. This guy loves him.
He seems to have the majority caucus, majority of cabinet, even though Chrystia Freeland was the Deputy Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. And she has, in multiple interviews now, suggested that the Liberal establishment and the Prime Minister's office are lining up behind Mark Carney. I know you're a longtime friend of Justin Trudeau's. I mean, what do you say to these allegations coming from Chrystia Freeland that the PMO and the party elite are driving this?
Well, I think we need to rally a majority of Canadians. Anyone that's in Parliament, whether they're with the Liberal Party or any other party, for an outsider is seen as the establishment. I won't talk about any of that silliness. We can't be fractious as a party. We need to come out united as a party. We need to get a majority of Canadians and not a majority of caucus for the next election, and that, I think, is the focus. If we go into the next election or come out of this leadership race not unified or as fractious as we went into it, it's not going to bode well in the next election, and Canadians will see that. So I need to see a positive message from all candidates. I've heard that from Mark, and I want to hear a debate of ideas, and I'm putting my weight behind Mark Carney. I'm putting my organizational teams behind Mark Carney. I think when it comes to choices, you have to make a choice in politics, and for me, it's Mark.
Now, this actually is a very odd statement that Mark chose to make, because later on in the show, when they brought in the panel, the Conservative member, Lori, she points out that this is very weird that these guys are backing Mark Carney when normally it would be based off a policy or policy plans that they have that would bolster that support. Yet Carney has come out with no policy. Freeland has at least laid out some of what she has planned, and same with, I guess, Karina Gould. But Carney actually hasn't said anything, but is bolstering all the support, which kind of ties into what Freeland was saying, that the PMO is making this guy the top pick and trying to push the votes towards him.
I hear you. I mean, one of the areas in which we used to get policy, one of the areas that we used to get fissures was around policy. Like this whole this whole discussion is devoid of policy at the moment. I don't know what the cabinet ministers are looking at when they say Mark Carney's our guy, because he hasn't come out with any policy at all. He's come out with a slick commercial. He's talked about building, pretty middle of the road pablum-y kind of stuff. Chrystia Freeland's got a few things that she's come out with, but people are making really big decisions very early on. And maybe Vanton is right. It's all about the sizzle and not about the steak. So if you're not going to have policy disagreements within the party, it may be a little bit easier for them to get along at the end of the day. Look, liberals are always different from conservatives when it comes to stuff like this.
Now, after Mark made this statement, David even pushed back saying, you keep saying how he's the best choice, he's the best option to beat Pierre, but he's never been a politician, he's never been in politics, and now he's gunning to be the top spot, the prime minister. What qualifications or what makes him eligible for this in your eyes? And Mark gives one of the weakest answers I've ever heard.
You said he gives you the best chance to beat Pierre Poilievre. If you look at the data today, I mean, he does fare better than Chrystia Freeland in some polls, but it's still a wide gap. That looks like a Prime Minister Poilievre at the end of it with a big Conservative majority. So what is it that he can do, in your view, in the time you have until Election Day to change that?
Well, elections matter, and I think you claw away a percentage every week at an election, and it's a horse race. Certainly, we can't take the Conservatives for granted. I see Mark in complete contrast to a guy like Pierre Poilievre. If you compare what Pierre Poilievre has never even put through a piece of legislation through Parliament, and Mark Carney has a resume that speaks for itself. I think that makes them scared. I take more comfort in seeing what Mark is bringing to the table and to our party and to help build it. Certainly this is his first foray into elected politics, so he'll be challenged on a lot of fronts, but I think he's certainly up to it.
Do you worry about that, though? Never having run for anything and wanting to immediately come in? Like, Prime Minister's not an entry-level job, and that's where he's going to start, right? So are you worried about his ability to run a campaign, having never done anything like that before?
Look, he has several decades of experience in the private sector. That's something the alternative, Pierre Poilievre, hasn't done for even 1 year. It is difficult to be in politics. Some people do struggle in it, and we've seen examples in the past. But I see all the skill set there, particularly in a guy that's willing to learn, at least through the conversations that I've had. And, speaking from experience, never underestimate a goalie.
Now, that lame reference at the end there is because when Mark Miller was young and when Mark Carney was young, they both played goalie as a position in hockey. But I don't know why they dog on Pierre so much just because he's basically been a career politician his whole life. The man has moved up the ranks from like a backbencher, a nobody, becoming an MP, becoming elected over and over and over again. Now he's the leader of the opposition and potentially the next prime minister. Like, the man has gone through the motions of going from bottom to the top, essentially, and he's been able to do it for how many years now? So, yes, maybe this has been his only job or he hasn't done anything else. I think in an interview he said he was a paperboy at one point. But if you're looking at who's the best suited for the position of prime minister, it would be Pierre Poilievre. And obviously you guys are two different parties, so it's not like you can have him as your liberal leader. But having Mark Carney be the person to take over prime minister, and you think that that's a great idea because of his CV has all these Bank of Canada, Bank of England, etc., doesn't make any sense. The guy who's been in politics and has worked his ass to stay in politics as long as he has, I'm pretty sure he would be top notch for the job. But with that being said, I'd love to hear from you guys. Let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. And as always, I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.